All right. As you were informed last week, and I think I had mentioned at the beginning of the semester, we're fortunate this year in Ursuline because beginning last year, Key Bank gave Ursuline College a grant by which we were able to bring a diversity fellow to campus. And last year, the person was Christy Williams, and this year it's Dr. Lisa Brown, and Lisa is here with us. And when you have a diversity fellow on campus, one of the things that you look for are opportunities where the person can share something with you that fits into the class. And as people being prepared to be administrators, I have no doubt that we ought to know something about spiral dynamic theory. And that is the area that Lisa is focusing on. She did her doctoral work at the University of Georgia. She has K-12 experience. It was her master's work at Akron. And so Lisa has been with us all year, but in the beginning, she had a teaching assignment, and we weren't all able to use and access her gifts in other classes. But this semester, we are able to do so. And when Lisa and I talked, I thought we had two options. We could simply have Lisa for one whole class, but it made more sense to me to spread it over time so that you'd have the opportunity to reflect on what Lisa has to say and share. So we have Lisa for an hour tonight. We won't have Lisa again until the 28th because we don't have class on the 14th, and the 21st is a cubby night. So Lisa will be back on the 28th, and then there's a date in March. I just don't have it in my head. So I'm pleased to have Dr. Lisa Brown here this evening to share with you. And Lisa, it's all yours.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Dean Connell. And I'm so excited to be here with you all. As the Dean shared with you all, I have my PhD from the University of Georgia, and I actually did my dissertation research in Chile, South America. And I used spiral dynamic theory as my theoretical framework. I wanted to look at the impact of civic engagement on adults over time who were engaged in higher education within the context of traditional public education and private for-profit universities. And because Chile had been under a privatized, entrepreneurial, market-based educational system since the dictatorship of Augusto Pinochet, they had in place this system for almost 40 years. So I was excited because I already had kind of like a test scenario that was already in place. So all I had to do is look at those adults who were at these traditional public universities and those who were at the private for-profit universities, with the phenomenon of study being civic engagement. So in order to undertake that effort, my dissertation advisor said, you need a really comprehensive theoretical framework that allows you to look at adult development. And I said, I agree with you. And so as a result of that, I started looking through the literature, and I saw that most of the developmental frameworks that were in place, particularly in education, were based on children and adolescents. So I was like, oh my gosh, I have to find something that deals with adults. So I saw Maslow, Vygotsky, Erickson, and those kind of guys, but it really wasn't quite what I needed. And then I discovered Claire Gray's spiral dynamic theory, which in fact was called the emergent cyclical level of existence theory. And now, as you can imagine, you'll understand why I was changed to spiral dynamic theory. So the stance I take in this presentation with you all is to talk about how educators are leaders and that we set the tone in the classroom, in the building, and in some instances in the community. So my approach today is to have three parts to the presentation. Today I'll be talking about the foundations of spiral dynamic theory and its constructs. And I'm going to be using PowerPoint for the presentation and also video clips. So I just wanted to let you all know some of the clips come from Game of Thrones and Wolves of Wall Street. So I hope I do not offend anyone's sensibility because there's some cussing in it. But
Lisa, the group is easily offended.
Okay, great. So we all know what we're dealing with. In any event, the second part is going to be the second tier, and I gave you guys some outlines here of the spiral dynamic theory framework, and I'll go into more details about it. So hopefully I'll get through the first tier constructs, And then the second tier, and then we'll talk about the way that change occurs in terms of moving from one worldview to the next. Then the third part, I plan to create some critical analysis scenarios, so you be in groups, and I'll give you scenarios of actors who are educators or parents, etc., and you're going to identify the spiral dynamic theory worldview and operation for each of the persons, and what would be maybe the best way to resolve the conflict or address the issue that's at hand. So that should be a lot of fun after you guys become spiral dynamic theory experts, and then we'll debrief on the last day as well. So did everybody get a chance to read the article? Did anybody find it really interesting? Okay, great. Does anybody have any questions so far about it? Okay. So if anyone were to ask me, please give me your main pearl for being an educator, and my own personal wisdom would be that cookie cutter approaches to teaching and learning do not work. When I was in Columbus, I had worked at Children's Hospital in injury prevention. I was director of injury prevention there. We lost funding, but I had always wanted to be an educator. Prior to that, I was a university administrator for like 13 years, and I was at Edinburgh University of Pennsylvania last, and director of intercultural relations. So after leaving the university, after leaving the hospital, I decided to substitute teach. And as a result of that, I ended up getting long-term contracts because I was a science teacher. My undergrad is in biology and chemistry. And so I was like, hey, maybe this professor thing might work out for me. So I decided to go back to school and work on my PhD, but that was largely in part because I kept seeing some of my students who I knew struggled in the science area tell me after they graduated as seniors they were going to be computer science majors or nurses, etc., etc., etc. And I was like, oh, baby, you really struggling. You know, what school are you going to? And they started talking about all these private for-profit universities. And so as I started to investigate them, I found that a good number were kind of exploitive of low-income minority students. Because at the time, the way that the structure of financial aid was set up is that the low-income students could get access to a lot of grants and loans. And so these institutions would recruit these people, knowing that a lot of times they did not have the ability to be successful in a science or STEM program, but they had the high financial aid ability. So the students would go in and get all these loans and grants, and then would not be successful, and then have all this debt on top of not having a degree, or a degree that wasn't very credible. And you had, in some instances, nursing majors who never set foot in a hospital. So Obama put in place those gainful employment metrics that kind of, curtailed that kind of more unscrupulous behavior. But as a result of that, I really became interested in looking at that phenomenon of the private for-profit versus traditional public university, and I used civic engagement as my way in which to examine that. So in any event, the point about the cookie cutter approach is that it was in 2010 that I went back to graduate school, and then in 2016 when I graduated, I came back, I'm all excited, okay, I'm gonna look for a faculty job, but I'm gonna teach again. And my sister was like, things have changed a lot since you were gone. I was like, what are you talking about? She said, the students aren't the same, neither are the administrative environments. And I said, oh, okay, she's exaggerating. But she was not exaggerating. Some of the things that we had to deal with as teachers had changed, but you almost felt like a social worker because you had to be so aware of all the dynamics that were going on, not only with the students, but as well as with their parents. And so this is where I feel like spiral dynamic theory helps us, because you have to know what and who you are bringing into the classroom environment. And knowing who you are, what your values are, and what your worldviews are that can either hinder or facilitate high quality learning. And so spiral dynamic theory is a comprehensive theory of adult development. And so it examines the thinking and deep values that are reflected in the worldviews that we hold. What it is not is an explanation of personality types, and that's important to know. So this is not some kind of Briggs-Myers evaluation model. Spiral dynamic theory is not related to IQ either, because you can have a person who has high IQ, but very simplistic and basic worldviews because of their lack of exposure. But the theory is based on an examination of the maturing nature of healthy adults over time. So this does not account for any kind of mental illness. Spiral dynamic theory was created by psychologist Claire Graves, and what's so ironic is that he actually worked here in the Northeast Ohio area and went on to work at Union College in New York as he further developed and created this theoretical model. But he was a criminal psychologist for the Cuyahoga courts, and he also was a faculty member at Case at one time. And so his model, as I said earlier, was called the emergent cyclical level of existence theory. And that's a mouthful to say. So his proteges, Don Beck and Chris Cohen, created a term that they call spiral dynamics to explain his theory. And they subsequently wrote a book in 1996. So the model has been more commonly known as spiral dynamics, but its inception was the emergent cyclical level of existence theory. And I'll show you why that makes sense. Even though Claire Graves does not use the term meme or the mimetic science literature, the operations of his worldview constructs and how they come into being are very highly related to mimetic literature. So in my research, I definitely use memes. In his protege's description of the theoretical framework, they use what was called a value meme. So I'll talk a little bit more about what a meme is too as well. But Claire Graves does talk about the deep values that we hold that we're not necessarily always conscious of. His theory is unique from some of the others that I looked at is because it involves hierarchical evolving ontologies. So our sense of reality, our values, what we thought was truth, what we think is high quality knowledge evolves over time as we mature as adults. And it goes from a very simplistic way of interpreting and viewing the world to a more higher order thinking that involves an expanded neurological cognition that you use in order to problem solve at each level of existence. The framework is unique from what you might see in a more Maslow'ian model because it's open-ended. Claire Graves held that adult human capacity for learning was open-ended, that it was a never-ending quest. Because as we resolve problems on one level, we create another existential crisis that requires that we expand our way of viewing and negotiating the world. And so, spiral dynamic theory operates within three domains. First, on the individual level, and then, of course, organizations are made of individuals. So these characteristics or ways of viewing or operating can be reflected in how an organization runs and then also how a society operates. So we start off with looking at the levels of human values. And the first part of this presentation is going to seem very didactic. I apologize for that because I want to make sure that I give you the constructs and then we'll have more opportunities to engage. But if you want to stop me and have a question, please just raise your hand and feel free to do so. So we all have what are called surface values, and it can be representative of the religions that we hold, the laws that we follow, and just common sense practices. You don't cuss out your teacher, you don't spit on your classmates, those kind of things are common sense values that we hold, and we have no problems with people being aware of that. But underneath those surface values are these hidden values that are representative of our long-standing beliefs, attitudes, and traditions. These hidden values are often conscious, but we don't necessarily want to articulate them openly to people. And they tend to inform our surface values. Beneath that hidden level is a deeper level and more unconscious level where the spiral dynamic theory constructs are more represented. This is the deep values that we hold, and they inform how we think, and then also in a kind of hierarchical way direct our hidden values and then are reflected in our more surface values that we show to people. So in what ways might we appropriate or pass on our deep values or cultural worldviews? And my argument is that that occurs mimetically. So we've all heard the term mean before, right? It sounds very similar to gene, and that was intentional. Richard Dawkins coined the word mean because he wanted it to be analogous to the human gene. And we know that in biology, the human gene is transferred through hereditary means. So you have this phenomenon of replication, variation, and natural selection in order for a genetic characteristic to survive and be passed on. The arguments of memetics is the theory that there are units of culture that get and operate similar to a gene, but they are passed on non-genetically through human imitation. So the same way you'll see a gene go through the process of replication, variation, and natural selection, the mean does the same thing. Now, I have a theory that it isn't necessarily non-genetic, but that's for a later date. So, Richard Dawkins, and I have this little video to share with you, gives you a general overview of memes that I think will be helpful as we go forward.
It looks like an epidemic, it behaves like a virus. That is memes, that's the spread of memes. My first book, The Selfish Gene, published in 1976, was all about the gene of the unit of selection. The gene, the universal replicator DNA. I wanted to make the point that although DNA was the unit of selection in life, any unit of selection would do if it were a replicator that faithfully copied itself. So I wanted another example. I could have used a computer virus, but I think they hadn't been invented then. So I used the meme instead, the unit of cultural inheritance. Anything that's copied, in this case from brain to brain. It could be something like a tune that you whistle, and somebody else picks up the tune and whistles it again, and then it spreads like an epidemic. Blue tits, the birds in Britain that learned how to open milk bottles. Milk bottles in Britain used to be put on the doorstep every morning, and one rather clever bird learned how to open the milk bottle, and then it spread as an epidemic because others imitated it. That's a meme. The reverse baseball cap is a meme. Anything that's imitated, anything that spreads by imitation. We talk about things on the internet going viral. That is memes. That's the spread of memes. To the extent that some memes spread better than others, that's a kind of natural selection. So I wasn't really attempting to make a contribution to the study of human culture. I was rather attempting to downplay the gene as the only unit of natural selection.
And this is an image meme. So, do you all remember the recent controversy with Dove soap, and how when the black woman removed the shirt, she showed a white woman? So people were really, really angry about that. And so to see how people responded to that mimetically, you had these memes being created by folks where someone says when the cops show up to a party and they show themselves with a Dove ad and then they take it off and they're a white guy. And then somebody had some fun with Michael Jackson and used the Dove meme as a way to show his mimetic evolution. But the reason why people were so offended is that this mimetic construct, this idea, was based historically in a very racist notion that black skin was dirty. And that in this advertisement, it showed that in order to improve your complexion, you use this company's soap that allowed you to get a more attractive appearance. So that's an example of the image meme and how it has historical roots in very racist contexts. And so I hope my clicker hasn't stopped. So that's an example of an image meme. And as I said, memes can be ways that people believe and think and operate. So when you go to identify the mimetic worldview constructs, the framework, I gave you all a handout. And so if you can refer to this for a moment. Today's lesson is going to pretty much focus on this lower level. And so,
didn't you say the handouts have to be shared?
Yes, you have to share them. So be kind to your neighbor. So Clear Grace held that the majority of people operate at this first level, which he described as the subsistence level. And in this level, we have a preoccupation with just meeting our basic needs. But as a person becomes more stable or doesn't have to worry about some of the more basic things like water, shelter, keeping your job, making sure your kids don't get on drugs. It allows you to move more toward the second tier level, or you have higher degrees of freedom that you're not so preoccupied with how you're going to eat every day. And so you have the opportunity to engage in education and experiences that allow you to expand your worldview, because you're not preoccupied with some of the more basic things that most of us deal with on a daily basis. This theoretical framework was also valuable to me is because it oscillated between these themes of individualism and collectivism. So if you look at this right side, it has these color-coded mnemonic devices that are associated with the representation of that particular worldview. And so what you will find is that these colors are representative of a more warmer type of orientation, or more excited type individualist orientation. And then the bluer, or this side of the framework representing collectivism, are more calming kind of orientations. In any event, I'm going to go into detail about each one of the constructs on level 1. And as I said, we're going to focus pretty much on the first 6, but I am going to share with you some of the other tier 2. Now, Claire Gray's research was based on mostly these 6 levels and his work with his psychology students. And he also used anthropological records mostly to address some of these lower level, because when you start thinking about college students, you really would most likely see a little bit higher order thinking and operation for them. So why the metaphor of a spiral? Based upon Claire Gray's theory, we make these movements on the framework and we go through these systems as we expand our ability to problem solve and also come up with solutions and how we respond to the complexity that enters our life. But within these systems, he actually says that most people operate within 3 at the same time, and there's a predominance of a particular worldview. And you'll see that as I move toward the video. But this particular theory is valuable too, is that these systems are subsuming. So a lot of these step models that you might see with Erickson talk about us going through these phases, but Claire Gray is very explicit in his belief that we retain these systems even as we develop these higher order ways of thinking, and we draw upon them in a regressive manner when we face an existential crisis we don't know how to resolve. So you'll revert back to something that you did in the past that may not be appropriate for that particular challenge. For example, if I'm in a school situation and I'm dealing with a parent who's very, very irate about how they feel like I'm dealing with their child, and that parent comes across the table at me at a conference and wants to beat me up. Okay, I'm from the hood. I feel like I might revert back to resolving this crisis in a way that we do in my community. But as a professional, that's not appropriate. But that could be my initial thought. But then I know that I have to behave in a more professional manner and think of a way to respond to this parent who has, decided to engage in fisticuffs with me. So, starting at the first level, as I said, he used mostly anthropological records to develop this because he couldn't interview cavemen. They weren't around. And so, when you look at some of the constructs of this particular way of viewing the world, it's centered around the satisfaction of biological needs. So the imperatives of food, water, shelter, protection is what's happening in this particular worldview. It's driven by instinct and genetics. There's no self-awareness at this stage and no ability to really be complex in your interpretation of how you're negotiating life in the world. So there's little awareness of yourself as a distinct individual or being. Life, you live off the land, much like an animal would, and people have little impact or control over their living environment. So they're not setting up and building communities and skyscrapers. Existence centers around the survival, and there is no self-awareness at this stage. you have low-order, non-complex thinking in operation. So some examples of what could be representative of this particular worldview would be what exists for a newborn baby. A baby isn't aware of its surrounding, but it'll cry because it's hungry or needs its diaper changed. Also, some people who have maybe experiencing mental illness and are living on the street, they don't have that kind of awareness. So that was another example of the type of worldview that could be representative of this particular construct. Or, you know, first human societies like I talked about, cave people. Now, this next video is representative of what is called the clannish worldview construct, and it's represented by the purple mnemonic. And so these letters here, and if I was teaching this as a class, I can go into more details with it, but the B represents the existential crisis, and the O represents the neurological capabilities of resolving that crisis. So that's what those letters represent. But here, I don't know, my batteries are, I think my clicker is dying. So let's see what this is. Good. So in this particular worldview, there's attention to obeying the desires of a mystical spirit being. So also associated with this worldview, there's an allegiance to elders. And so there's attention and valuing of matriarchy and patriarchal systems. There's an adherence to group culture and clan preservation. There's attention to sacred places, and objects and rituals are observed. The clan bonds together to endure problems and find safety. One lives in a kind of enchanted spiritual and magical world. And there is a seeking to achieve harmony with nature's power. So this video is an indigenous woman talking about a problem they're having as it relates to the politicians they were dealing with. And initially, when you look at these constructs, it's easy to maybe kind of make a judgment about a person who views the world like this. And I think that's where we need to be careful in understanding that people view the world in different ways. They interpret and negotiate in different ways. And what's important for us as educators and leaders is to respect people's ways of knowing and how they negotiate their problems. Here we go. Thank you.
You don't think that anything he's doing is helping the situation? Is he an improvement over Stephen Harper? I mean, what?
Just about.
Excuse me, did I just hear you correctly? How can he be blamed with that? Excuse me. Don't speak to us that way.
Stop right now. You do not speak to us that way. We are human beings, and the way that you're speaking to us
It's not acceptable.
You are
No,
not.
stop it. Stop it right now.
We don't want you here. Can you please
Step out.
step out?
Step out. Then I don't want to hear from you.
You have no right.
You don't speak to us like that.
Simple question.
Yeah.
Answer.
And this is the problem, the way you communicate.
I'm not sending you for information.
I'm not going to argue. I'm going to stop.
No, stop. Stop. You need to stop.
I'm only.
You need to stop. Stop. Kipishchi.
You don't.
Mona kindoy na mitin chamani na miyak. Asha washkat kitos chamani na minan. Kikis chakas ko na ay mani na miyak. Tapos ko sa ekain ni nuyak. Ekwan ni ispanik. Ekwan makamosa ko may kahtago siyak. Tapos ko sa ikis chakakipat siyak. You're a guest here. And you don't even know how to speak to us. You don't even recognize the tone in your voice and your delivery. And no, you're done. You're done. Next question.
I'll be asking this question. How do you think? Yes. How do you think?
You better be respectful.
I'm being totally respectful. I'm asking how Justin Trudeau's record compared to Stephen Harper's record. Do you think he's improved the situation? I think that's what Trudeau's asking.
We have a holistic genocide happening here.
Don't speak on behalf of Judy.
I can speak for myself.
And I can speak for myself. You know what, white people? You've had your voice here for 524 years. 524 years you've been visible. White lady, you've been invisible for 524 years. Look how fast your white man comes and steps up for you. Where is everybody else to come and step up for us? I have a right to my voice. I'm still fighting for my voice and my visibility. And I'm telling you right now, there has been 524 years of holistic genocide on Turtle Island. We're the ones that are dying. It's not you that is dying. And as far as how Justin Trudeau is doing, one of the things that we need to keep in mind is we're asking the United Nations to help us that charges of genocide, a war against humanity, war crimes, and a crime of aggression be laid, because your Liberal Party was also responsible. Every party, every governance that has been in power, there's been a war conflict of Indian Residential School, 60 Scoop, Indian Day School, and Millennium Scoop. None of your governments have clean hands. All of your governments have blood on their hands. None of you are different. You haven't changed because you haven't started your healing journeys. The moment that we have our voice and our backbone, you want to shut us down. And you think you're privileged to disrespect us. The moment we tell you, because of your colonial mindset and your colonial way of being, your white privilege, your white fragility, you can't take our truth. Look how many people came to bat for you, white lady, and you're a guest here. Without us, you'd be homeless. This is over.
So you saw there in this representation, you saw the feathers that were representing the sacred artifacts. She went into a chant when she felt like she was under attack in the room to try and, set the tone in the environment. You also saw that initially it was a young woman who was at the podium, but she stepped aside when the elder came up because she came to take control of the situation. So you saw that matriarchal system in place there. And as I said, as you make these movements through the spiral, you start to see some of the characteristics kind of represent themselves as well. And I say that because of the next system. So this system, that we moving from that collectivist kind of purple to this next more individualistic system. And so in this system, it's been called or termed the egocentric system, and it's represented by the red color. So in this system, you see a worldview that exists of the haves and have-nots, and your role is to be a have. In this system, there is an avoidance of shame and a demand for respect. So you kind of saw that in the previous system, right? So she was saying, you guys need to respect that. So that's the next movement from that more collectivist, calmer worldview to this more, individualistic, self-assertion worldview. The other thing you'll see in this system, there is low impulse control, and one looks for immediate gratification. One will fight remorselessly and without guilt in order to break free of any imposed constraints in this particular worldview construct. It does not exercise the benefit of foresight that mediates future consequences, because in this worldview, there might not be a future. So I'm going to deal with whatever I deal with now and not worry about the consequences. You tend to see an unconstrained risk-taking in this particular worldview. One values power and domination, and they view life as a jungle. So, it's about survival, it's about taking care of yourself, it's about being on top. A good representation of this historically would be the feudalist system, so feudalism. And so when you had that hierarchy of those who had power and control, and they would mete out the control that still maintain and preserve their power. This one is hard to see too, so we're going to need those lights.
You're not one of mine, are you? No, my lord.
Didn't think so. Too pretty. Where are my damn moron sons? Blackwalder and Lothar promised to be here by midday.
They're here, my lord.
Oh, what are they doing? Trimming their cunt hairs? Tell them to come here, now.
They're already here, my lord. Here, my lord. They weren't easy to carve, especially Blackwalder.
My name is Arya Stark. I want you to know that. The last thing you're ever going to see is a Stark smiling down at you as you die.
Okay. So we make our next movement because who wants to live in a jungle, right? So that kind of worldview becomes problematic at some stage as a person starts to mature. You can't go around sitting the throat of everybody who doesn't agree with you. So the next permutation is a movement back toward the more collectivist orientation. And this one is called the mimetic or purposeful worldview, and it's represented by the color blue. So in this particular construct, one is more self-sacrificing to an idealized life path or pursuit of meaning and purpose. Another characteristic of this particular worldview orientation is one seeks to bring order and stability to all things chaotic. So in this particular worldview, rules, policies, following the expected norms are very much a part of this particular worldview. I find that this orientation is very commonplace in school systems and systems that are more traditional oriented. Controlling impulse, desire, and being sensitive to feelings of guilt are important here. So you don't want to do anything that is going to engender guilt in you. So in the previous system, we saw remorselessness where guilt didn't really matter because the worldview does not have guilt. But in this one, guilt does exist, and the intention is to avoid guilt. And how do you avoid guilt? Following the rules, following the policies, doing those things that are right and good. You see an enforcing of rules and righteous living in this particular worldview under a divine plan, and it assigns people to a particular place in life. Like, this is your place in life, this is your role. Also, what you'll notice too, when I talked about the collectivist and individualist orientation, the locus of control are different for those systems. So those systems that are more collectivist, the locus of control is external. So there's some external being, some external power that dictates to the individual. In these other systems, your locus of control is internal. I control my destiny. I am in charge. I am the captain of my destiny. So in this particular worldview, there's a real attention to obeying authority and following rules. That's why I say I see it very closely aligned to what we see in educational settings. Destiny is controlled by a single driving omnipotent force that is external to you. And there's a high attention given to what is right, proper, and good in the system. So this video here is going to be representative of that particular worldview. But what's going to be interesting, you're also going to see some red in here too.
I think human nature is to, like, just make them like you or do things in their favor.
Okay. When we were young, we naturally wished to please our parents, our teachers, our ministers and rabbis. Even as adults, we wish to please authority figures, such as our boss at work. However, if obedience to authority causes us to ignore our own ethical standards, big trouble can result. Okay.
There was a time when we ran out of like some really bold coffee, and my manager was just like, just give them the light one. Like, they're not gonna know, coffee is coffee. I kind of felt bad because it wasn't what they wanted and wasn't what they were paying for. But I was like, okay, well, if the manager says yes, then here's the bold coffee.
When people in organizations make decisions, they are often much more concerned about the acceptability of the decision to the people to whom they are accountable than they are about the content of the decision itself. Studies show CFOs are more likely to illicitly manage earnings when it profits their CEOs than when it profits themselves. In other words, they act unethically primarily to please their bosses, not to put money in their own pockets.
I worked at CVS Pharmacy, and every week we would have different sales, and a lot of times regular customers, they would find these sales and use manufacturer's coupons. So basically they were getting more money back than they were paying, and even though it was technically right, it was harming our store, and so my manager didn't like that. My manager just told me to say that we were sold out of them so that the customer couldn't buy anymore. It kind of made me a little uncomfortable just because I didn't have a reason really to lie at all. I don't know the person, but I kind of just did it because it was something small and my boss told me to.
Private emails sent by stock analysts during the .com boom often indicated that the analysts wished they had the courage to stand up to their superiors and call them like they saw them. No! But usually, these analysts failed to do so. Instead, they continued to knuckle under to supervisory pressure to hype questionable stocks so that their firms could gain investment banking loans. Most of us simply do not realize how much our desire to please superiors and our consequent tendency to defer to authority will cloud our ethical judgment when the time comes to make decisions. Okay.
If it's an authority figure like a boss that you really like, or you really need to like you, that I have a tendency to commit to something without thinking about what else I have. So if a boss asks me to stay late, I may say, yes, of course I can, because I want to do this project right. I want to make sure you like it. It's ready when you want it to be, without thinking about previous engagements I've made to other people and disappointing other people in my life, or attending to my own needs, which can kind of conflict with what I actually need to do outside of my job.
A study of nurses by Hoffling and Brodsman found that when members of one group of nurses were asked whether they would follow a physician's instructions to give a patient an injection of an obviously excessive dose of a drug that was not even on the hospital's approved list, almost all the nurses said they would not do so. But when a second group of nurses were actually given such instructions, virtually every one of them was prepared to do so before they were stopped by the experimenters.
As a freshman, I got elected to student government as a business school representative, and I would just feel so much pressure to please the executive board. Right away, I found myself in a situation where maybe I was voting to please the executive board and to make them think well of me so that I would get certain perks and promotions. Is one of those things where it's unconscious until it comes to fruit. And then afterwards, you're very conscious of what you just did.
More concerning than people consciously acting unethically in order to stay in their boss's good graces is the fact that sometimes employees are so intent upon pleasing their superiors that they do not even notice the ethical aspects of the decision. Eagle Bud Crow, who became infamous as head of the plumbers unit operating out of President Nixon's White House, was instructed to oversee a break-in at the office of the psychiatrist of Daniel Ellsberg, who had leaked the Pentagon Papers to the New York Times, embarrassing the Nixon administration. Crow later explained that he was so intent upon pleasing his superiors, who were, after all, among the most powerful people in the world, that he never even activated his own ethical sense to judge the morality of what he was trying to accomplish. He did not see the ethical dimensions of his situation until it was too late. Bud Crow's experience should be a warning to us all. While it is usually a fine thing for us to please our supervisors, we must keep a lookout for ethical issues. And we must never defer so completely to our bosses that we substitute their orders for our own ethical standards.
Okay. I'm homosexual, I'm gay. And my mom asked me when I was younger to like go and, I don't know, talk to my pastor about it and like basically to see what was wrong with me. After a while, I told her, you know, I personally am not okay with this because I'm not hurting anyone, you know, knowing they were going to be angry about it instead of just lying about it. That was hard. But in the long run, I think it helped me out because it helped me be a prouder person. And it did help me come to the point to where it feels good to be truthful.
I think just listening to that inner voice is key.
The sort of environment that helped me be able to speak up is one where you're treated as an equal, at least on a personal level.
Remember that there's really big consequences to acting unethically sometimes, and just one time can destroy a program, can destroy a person, like what they've worked for their entire life.
I think if you keep those ideas in mind, it'll be easier for you to say, that's not ethical, and I'm not going to do that.
All right, so, thank you, right person. So one of the things I want to point out at this stage is a very important aspect of this framework. You tend to have the most conflict with worldviews that are directly across from each other. So there, I thought it was ironic that the boss had a red tie. So you even see kind of like these subconscious representations of the systems in the representation. But it was clear that most of the people were operating under a need to obey the authority and follow the rules. And that they saw there being an absolutist right or wrong way to conduct yourself in life and to behave, even though they didn't always have the strength to exercise that. So here you have the red-blue system, and if you were talking about leadership or bosses, people who have these kind of worldview orientations will likely have a lot of conflict. But the irony is, those who are in the same kind of construct system of individualism or collectivism, they tend to understand each other. And there tends to be a little bit more connection between those types. So this next one I'm going to show you is the orange system. And the person from the red system would probably in most instances admire the person in the orange system. And you'll see why as we go forward. But in this particular construct, you also notice that as we progress through these worldviews, you see a little bit more complexity and sophistication in the way that the person thinks and negotiates the world. And remember, these systems are subsuming. So there's a part of you, even though you may be in orange, and that might be your dominant orientation, there's still a part of you that recognizes the blue system and the red system that you at some point advanced from. And so here in this system, you see individuals that value autonomy, profiteering, and independence. One seeks the good life through gaining material abundance. Methodically searches, this individual, this worldview, methodically searches for the best solution to a problem or issue. So it's very interested in doing those things that are going to be most profitable, and then looking to resolve problems in an intelligent, profitable way. This system also has a high value for the use of technology. It privileges science and technology as a tool for obtaining that enhanced life. It enjoys competition and it plays to win. So that's really important in this system. It shows constrained risk and manipulates in order to achieve one's success. What's also interesting is that this worldview is manipulative, but it doesn't want to draw attention to itself. So it operates in a very clandestine way to achieve its goals of material wealth and success. This particular worldview values learning from tried and true experiences, and it researches before it makes decisions. So let me go ahead and play this particular worldview representation with Leo. And you'll see some of these things come out.
All right, we're on you focus for a second. See those little black boxes? They're called telephones. I'm going to let you on a little secret about these telephones. They're not going to dial themselves, okay? Without you, they're just worthless hunks of plastic. Like a loaded M16 without a trained ring to pull the trigger. And in the case of the telephone, it's up to each and every one of you, my highly trained Stratonites, my killers who will not take no for an answer, my fucking warriors, who will not hang up the phone until their client either buys or fucking dies! Let me tell you something. There is no nobility in poverty. I've been a rich man and I have been a poor man, and I choose rich every fucking time. Because at least as a rich man, when I have to face my problems, I show up in the back of a limo wearing a $2,000 suit and a $40,000 gold fucking watch. Anyone here thinks I'm superficial or materialistic? Go get a job at fucking McDonald's, because that's where you fucking belong. But before you depart this room full of winners, I want you to take a good look at the person next to you. Go on. Because sometime in the not so distant future, you're going to be pulling up to a red light and you beat up old fucking Pinot, and that person's going to be pulling up right alongside you in that brand new Porsche with that beautiful wife by their side who's got big voluptuous tits. And who are you going to be sitting next to? Some disgusting wildebeest with 3 days of razor stubble and a sleeveless moo crammed in next to you and a carload full of groceries from the fucking Price Club. That's who you're going to be sitting next to. So you listen to me and you listen well. Are you behind on your credit card bills? Good, pick up the phone and start dialing. Is your landlord ready to evict you? Good, pick up the phone and start dialing. Does your girlfriend think you're a fucking worthless loser? Good, pick up the phone and start dialing. I want you to deal with your problems by becoming rich. All you have to do today is pick up that phone and speak the words that I have taught you. And I will make you richer than the most powerful CEO in the United States of fucking America. I want you to go out there and I want you to ram Steve Madden stock down your clients' throats till they fucking choke on it. Till they choke on it and they buy 100,000 shares. That's what I want you to do. You be ferocious. You be relentless. You be telephone fucking terrorist. Now let's knock this motherfucker out of the park.
My apologies to anybody who that offended, but I thought it was a really good representation of that system. And you also, couldn't you see some red in there with him? When he talks about cramming it down their throat, and you know, he manipulates all those guys in the room. And so you start to see the worldview get more sophisticated in order to achieve its particular objective. So now we can take a deep breath and swing back the other way. So we're going back more toward a more collectivist orientation. And this is the one I always call this the hippie system because I identify with it. But it also is called the relativistic worldview. And in this system, you see an exploring of the inner being of self in connection to others. There is an attention to promoting a sense of community and unity, sharing the resources of the society among all. One seeks to liberate humans from the greed and imposing dogma that we saw in the previous system. Because these new systems emerge because at some point that current system becomes unsatisfactory. It becomes problematic. So you look for ways to move toward another resolution of that existential reality, and you move, according to this theory and what I've seen in my research, you orient right back to a more collectivist orientation. So decisions are reached through group consensus building. Attention to the ecosystem and the natural environment is held in high regard in this system. This system values spirituality that is unimposing in the pursuit of harmony. So in the blue system, you might see reverencing of spirituality. Martyrdom would be valued because you're looking at self-sacrifice in that system, obeying a priest or a pastor or something like this. Spirituality is valued in this system, but it's not dogmatic. You don't follow a particular person. You find that spirituality in the essence of the group, right? And through consensus. So this next one, how much time do we have? Do we have to 5:15?
No, not quite that.
Because this is the last system. Okay. So, okay. It's good. Okay.
Communal living, well, pretty prominent within a certain particular type of privileged millennial is a thing.
Yeah.
We have the belief that it's actually something that will be more mainstream within a certain amount of years' time. I think what we're trying to do is lay the infrastructure by which non-traditional communities can go ahead and embrace this style of living.
So it definitely should not just be millennial white dudes.
No.
Everyone in New York is super lonely. That may be why communal living is having a moment. More and more people are passing up studio apartments to live in group housing, sometimes paying more to do so. One company in Williamsburg, known as Pure House, brands itself as an intentional living community.
We're in a former old doll factory. It's been turned into a bunch of artist lofts. I hope it's haunted, but it hasn't been yet.
For New Yorkers whose identities have been swallowed up by the vast nothingness of the city, Pure House promises to focus on curating distinct groups of people and their passions.
Hi. Sam, good to meet you. Good to meet you, Sam.
Membership in Pure House gets you a private bedroom in one of 3 homes located within walking distance in Williamsburg.
It's a low ceiling, but it's high enough to stand up. Do you think this is a growing movement in the country, or is it still happening in little pockets?
I mean, communal living has been going on for centuries.
Yeah, since we were living together in caves.
But what's happening now, and this is part of a huge shift, our lives have become so efficient, and now people are looking for more meaning, more purpose, more community, more connection, more culture, connection with themselves and others. This is what I think is fueling this growing movement, and there are all these different gradients. So on the We Live side, we're talking about what I think of as kind of like condo living 2.0, but there isn't any kind of a operating system, so to speak, that allows for some sort of a kind of communal experience. And then on the other end of the spectrum, you have intentional communities, the kinds of things that are referred to as communes. Things like Pure House tend to be more in the middle.
Rooms at Pure House range between $1,500 and $1,800 and include occasional meals, yoga, and massages. By comparison, the more corporate communal housing at We Live in Lower Manhattan runs about $1,700 with no massages. You could rent a room in New York for cheaper, but these places provide intangibles that seem worthwhile to a lot of people, like this weekly dinner where they talk about sex.
Is there a sexual act you really enjoy doing?
When you're about to go down on a partner, but like you're kissing their stomach and like drilling into the teaching that you're right now.
What brought you to
I used to pay off the first year I was alone. I felt alone, doesn't matter how many people I met in school, and I feel that I don't have any kind of home to go back to. I was looking for an apartment, and then I found Pure House on one of the apps, and I got to the website and I was like, that's what I want to.
What do you think is behind the movement?
We've gone from a society of like belonging to like in a very individualistic society, but that feeling of wanting to belong somewhere doesn't necessarily go away. This allows you kind of the best of both worlds. There is a sense of belonging because everyone's passionate, but there is a sense of diversity where everyone's passionate about something else.
About different things.
Yeah.
Not about only about sharing the spaces. I think it's about sharing the conscious, of like we are a group, we are like, a community, and we help each other, and we provide for each other.
Yeah.
I think it will be ideal for society to be a little bit more open.
More communal.
More
And
communal.
recognize this humanity
Yeah.
as one common
Yeah,
body.
exactly.
Yeah.
That's
We
the
are
final
not
answer.
all these
We all are
separate
one. We all are one.
Right, right.
So it's
And yet
like,
if you just go like yelling down the subway platform, people look at you funny.
Yeah, that's true.
The fact that people are willing to pay more to share space than to have their own is telling. Social interaction is fundamental, a prerequisite for good health, and people are realizing that.
We're kind of restarting this mission at the beginning being like, what happens when you value share in a space where not everyone is white?
Remains to be seen.
It remains to be seen. Check in with us and
Yeah.
we'll see.
Yeah.
So it seems like the key to a good communal living experience is diversity. And of course, you want to make sure you're not joining a cult.
Yeah,
All
it's
right.
not big girl. We're doing the slide day thing, and it's just way simple. You're already doing it. It's
Yeah,
alright.
I know. I make eye contact all the
Yeah.
time.
So just like take your hand, just like put it on your lower belly.
Oh.
Yeah.
Are you seeing anything when I ask? Because people tell me like I'm not human or whatever.
I think you're not blinking a lot.
Okay.
Okay. I like that one because I always ask people at the end, if you had to identify what system that guy was in, what would you say he was? I heard somebody say something. Yes, that's what I said too. So you're getting it, awesome. So I'm going to stop there because we're going to stop at tier 1. And if you can pass in your handouts, because I need these for another class. When I come back, we'll talk about the next tier level. So I hope y'all enjoyed that because I think you're welcome. Because I think it'll help us when we start doing the scenarios.